Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Hobson. I'm the Chief Design Officer for Ed Plus at Arizona State University. It's my tremendous pleasure to welcome you to this panel on YouTube content for remote learning. Just to set a little bit of context, we have a student success crisis in this country. 1 out of 2 people who start post-secondary education don't complete within 6 years. Those who do, the biggest predictor of that is their family zip code. COVID has only accelerated these challenges. We know that 1.2 billion people have been forced into a remote learning circumstance. That's globally. We are in search of and desperate need of scaled learning and education opportunities. And it's my tremendous excitement to be able to have a discussion about scaled learning opportunities with this distinguished panel. And with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists by asking them a question. Hank Green, please introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about what you do in your journey in terms of learning remotely and with YouTube.
Yeah, I have always I've always hoped since like grade school, that I might one day be some kind of science communicator, like a lot of the people that I looked up to. I didn't know that science communicator was a term then, but I knew of the people who did it. But then, had a various careers throughout my 20s, as is often the case, kind of ending up in this weird situation where I was making YouTube videos with my brother, and that slowly took over as my full-time gig over the next, this sort of like latter part of my 20s. And then, we were making these YouTube videos and finding that one of the things that we could really do effectively, and something I really liked doing, was to teach something. And those videos were always the hardest ones to do. They took the most time, but they were also really rewarding. And we also found that they got viewed not just on the day we uploaded them, but sometimes years later. People would be, coming back to learn about the circulatory system or the French Revolution or something. And so we knew we were fairly good at that, and it was a dream of mine to do that work. And John loved doing it too, my brother. And we got the opportunity to launch a new YouTube channel with some funding from Google, or a couple of them, and did that in the form of SciShow and Crash Course. Crash Course being really focused on, the institutionalized education systems. So like the structures that actually educate people across the world, but with a focus on America. And Crash Course has since then, been viewed more than 1 billion times, and it's, it is used in maybe like almost every school, college and high school in America, and has been tremendously influential, like way beyond our dreams. And I think that was just like, that's a sign that there was a deep need for this kind of thing, and also for it to not cost a bunch of money or to be part of a big bureaucracy of educational media. And but also I think that it comes down to our our writers and our hosts' abilities to connect with the learners in a way that like makes people feel like what they're learning matters, and it like makes sense that they're learning it. Which is the thing that we talk about all the time internally. Is like, how do we actually inspire these people to want to learn this, rather than just be like, okay, well, you have to do this, so here are the equations, etc. So that's kind of what I do, and how we ended up doing it. The short version, anyway.
Great, thank you. Danielle, you have a dual role. You're both a professor at Northwestern, but you're also a YouTube creator and host. Talk to us a little bit about how you got into creating learning content on YouTube, and how that experience is as a professor as well.
Yeah, so I was an accidental YouTuber, I guess, which is maybe an oxymoron, because I feel like a lot of people feel like they're accidental YouTubers. I was a grad student getting a PhD in African American Studies, so I was studying history. And PBS, who's the partner that I make Origin of Everything with, along with Complexly, which is Hank's company. And PBS reached out to me in a cold call and said, would you be interested in coming in and doing an interview? We're making what they called Untitled History Show. And I was convinced that this was some sort of marketing scam, that they were trying to like get my social security number or, you know, build up my hopes or do something sort of sinister. I don't know why, because I love PBS and I was a PBS kid, but for some reason I didn't believe it was really them on the phone. So I went into this office in New York and we shot some video and I wrote some stuff, and I ended up landing this job. And it's been probably one of my most rewarding jobs that I've ever had. I make online content that is focused on history, a lot of US history, but also global history. And we try to make history an active and engaging process for our learners, for our audience. So really the question is the same question I ask my students in a traditional classroom, which is, why are we studying this thing? Or what does the past teach us? Or why do we look to the past for answers? We want history to seem like a critical analytical tool that people can use in their everyday life. And also to stay away from the kinds of history classes that people stereotypically think of when they think of history, which is lots of dates, lots of names, lots of things to memorize, and then quickly forget. We want to encourage people to think of it as storytelling, as active, and also analytical. So Origin of Everything is our channel, and we make videos twice a month. And I try to bring the same high quality education to my viewers on YouTube that I would bring to my kids in the classroom. So it's the same sort of questions that I ask myself, which is how do I keep them interested? How do I keep them engaged? How do I make this seem relevant? How do I give them the relevant information to make up their own minds about what they think? And it's those same questions that sort of organize how I do my work online and offline. But online, it's just on a much bigger scale. So in a classroom, I may be looking at 12 to 15 students in a normal seminar. And then online, obviously, you're looking at an infinite number of students who could really find you and find your content and be interested in it. So it's a much bigger audience, but it's still the same sort of key motivating factors that organize how I teach.
Great. Thank you. Yumna. You're both a student at ASU, but also a host for the popular ASU Study Hall series on YouTube. Talk to us a little bit about what being a student and engaging and interfacing with learning on a platform like YouTube means.
Yeah, so I think I come from a little bit of a different perspective because I grew up being somewhat exposed to educational media throughout traditional school. So, for example, my kind of career with this, I suppose, began in high school, in my high school chemistry class, when I had no idea how to do any of the equations or anything like that. And so I Googled high school chemistry help and found Crash Courses series. And from there, it's just it's been a part of my life and my education. And then obviously coming into this platform, it allows me to have people who I can look up to and look at as inspiration to how to be educational. So like Hank was saying, those hosts on Crash Course, I can look at them and see how I can be similar in a way, which is really, really helpful. But it's also a nice way of me being able to connect and knowing how to do that in a way without having to go through all of the trials and things like that.
Great. Thank you. Kristen, Sal Khan created his first educational video in 2008. You're Khan Academy's Chief Learning Officer. How did you get involved in this, and what does the evolution of Khan Academy look like?
Hi there. Thanks for having me as part of the panel. So yeah, it has been a journey from Sal's closet to what Khan Academy is today. For those who don't know, we provide free online instruction and practice in a variety of disciplines, math, science, humanities, etc. So part of the things that that I bring is a grounding in learning science. So I'm an educational psychologist. I bring in, what do we know about how people learn about all of this? And it turns out we know quite a bit about the things that can help people learn from these kinds of media. So everything from your tone, it turns out that an informal tone is a lot better for learning than a formal tone, because you start to feel like, hey, this person's in it with me. We're all here together to learn this, as opposed to someone who's judging you. There's a lot of research about how to combine text on the screen and narration, because you don't want people processing words visually and processing different words auditorily. So lots of things we can learn from learning science. And so hopefully I've brought some of that into where we're doing. The other thing that's been a bit of an evolution, Sal, pretty soon after making some of those first videos, also saw the value of practice along with them. And so started creating that combination of things. So we want students, particularly if you're learning a procedural skill, like how to do long division. It's really helpful when you're practicing, first of all, if you get stuck, to have a video to go to that's right there, because you forget what your teacher said earlier in the day about how to do this and it's not clear. So that's helpful, but it's also helpful when you're watching a video to be able to go and apply the thing you see right away, so that you're solidifying some of that knowledge, trying to move it from your working memory to your long-term memory. So for us, that combination of thinking about having the videos and opportunities to practice and apply it are really important as well.
Thank you. I'm so glad you said that, because there's a, I think a misnomer that learning on YouTube is a passive experience. It can actually be quite active. So I want to offer the other panelists an opportunity to talk a little bit about what they've learned and processes for designing learning materials at scale. And just to reiterate the scale we're talking about, there's about 17 million college students in the U.S. Between these panelists, you have about 22 million people that are subscribed to your channels, and you have over 3 billion views of your learning assets. So Danielle, back to you. Talk a little bit about making sure and how your approach to developing content is engaging and relatable.
So I always like to think of making content. So the kind of research that we do on Origin of Everything to make these videos is a lot of secondary research. So we're building on the work that people who have done primary research or years-long studies or years-long research have, kind of made available through the internet or through books or through articles. And really what we want at the core of what we do is to translate that sort of dense historical work in an educational and entertaining format for wide audiences. So I want to take something that maybe seems, what could be a 400-page history book that seems maybe unapproachable or has lots of key information in it, that maybe 100 people have bought that book. Not because it wasn't great and not because it isn't vital and important, but because it's prohibitively expensive or it's not available widely or it's behind a paywall on the internet. And to take that book and to animate it and make it, sometimes with animation, but sort of in the broader sense, to animate it and make it come alive for them. So when we start a video, the thing that we always have to start with is, what is the question we're trying to answer? And we spend a lot of time as a team thinking about that question. Because with history especially, really the question is the name of the game. If we want to avoid sort of boring or less interesting or less interactive history, we have to be asking questions that people are motivated to click on. And if we can get their attention really quickly and say, why have we never thought about why we eat popcorn at the movies? Because really it's an episode about farm subsidies and the Great Depression, but saying why do we eat popcorn at the movies is a more interesting question to ask people. And we could kind of backdoor them into this more intense history or this more dense history with something that seems fun or playful or approachable at the beginning. And then in the back end, what we want to encourage people to do is to read those same books and articles that maybe aren't widely available, and we make a works cited list for every episode so that people can continue their reading and continue their research, because our episodes on average are 8 to 13 minutes. And sometimes can cover 200 years of history in that small amount of time. So obviously we don't get to every single detail, every single prescient moment, but we want people to have just enough to say, I love this and I want to read more. So we make our works cited list, which is a really big active part of our learning experience. And then the last thing is that we spend a lot of time in the comments and on the community tab and doing lots of stuff to keep people activated and keep them engaged with what we're doing. So we ask them questions, we ask them to write to us, we respond to comments. We spend a lot of time doing fan episodes, which is one of my favorite things. We have one coming out soon on why do we have political parties, that a fan suggested, that I was like, that is a great topic that I don't know anything about and I would like to learn it. And just because I want to learn it, I'm like, I know other people will want to learn this too. So really a lot of what we think about for a history-centered channel and for making it something that could be shared at scale is what is the question and how does that question make people interested to learn more?
Great, thank you. Hank, over to you with that same question. You've been creating content, evolving the craft. You have many different channels. How have you kind of developed your recipe for developing engaging content over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think Danielle said a lot of it there. And, really there's a piece of, oh God, where to start? So we're all building a story of ourselves in the world. That's where to start. You are just it's the story you tell yourself about yourself in your own head. And so is the universe, and so is America, and so is, clothes, fashion, money, music, all that stuff. And like some of these stories we implicitly like already understand why we care about. Like we don't understand why we care about it. We just do. Like we care about, the sort of quintessential example is like people care a lot about like where a ball goes sometimes. And like we didn't like work really hard to explain to people why to care about where the ball goes. You just like express your enthusiasm for that thing, and people sort of like come along for the ride, and like the story builds itself around it. And at the same time, you're also seeing like amazing feats of athleticism, and you've got some in-group, out-group stuff, and so you've got like things that are tying into the story of why you should care where the ball goes. People like you can see people who appear to be quite cool caring a lot about where the ball goes, and so you also care about where the ball goes. People who are like you, people who are from the same place as you, your parents, your siblings, or just like LeBron James also cares a lot about where the ball goes, and he's very cool. And that's not, I'm not being facetious at all here. It can sound like when it's coming out of the mouth of a nerdy man, sometimes my understanding of sports can sound like it's facetious, but it is cool and it's amazing and it's important. And but so you understand that story. So finding ways to, without it being explained to you. So finding ways to get people to understand why a thing matters without being like, here's why this matters. I think matters is a big thing for us. And a lot of that is just like embodying the enthusiasm in the voice and perspective of the host. But a lot of it is also like in the writing process, telling a story that is interesting. And narrative is so important. And like story, in addition to providing this, like the story of like how movie theater popcorn became a thing. It's an interesting story, but it also, and so it sucks you in that way, but it also provides this framework on which you hang the knowledge. And so in traditional history education, where you're just sort of talking about like these decontextualized dates and you're like, understand that there was a war and like, what was the war like? Like, what was like understanding all these little things without the broader context, there's nothing to hang the knowledge on, and it just falls to the ground. And so, this is when educators talk about knowledge building, is like you are actually constructing a story with which you can stack more information on top of more information. And it's, I think that a lot of education does that very well, but a lot of it sort of misses the mark. So that's something we're always trying to do, is to tell a story that is like one long continuous story, because ultimately, like what education does, in addition to lots of other things, is it helps you create a story of how the whole world works. and that's going to have information in it from your math class and information from your history class, and both of those things are like deeply important to how society functions and how like the universe functions. So like each class kind of like hooks into that central story of like our built knowledge of our world, which is, you know, in science fiction, which I also write science fiction, you talk about world building. And I think all the time about how education is a process of world building, in the same way as when you're reading Lord of the Rings.
Great, thank you. So Yumna, you described a very specific experience, you know, struggling with a learning concept, going to Google, ending up on YouTube, and then you have lots of different choices in terms of what you watch and where you find yourself to answer that question. What are you looking for, and as you think about yourself also as a creator, how do you connect with your peers?
Well, when I access these things, I'm always looking for something that's engaging and fun, because on YouTube you can see a bunch of educational material and sometimes it's just a lecture, and it's like when I see an hour-long lecture on YouTube, that is not the first thing I'm going to click. But if it's engaging and fun and like it has something that can draw you in, then it makes it more appealing to not only me, but to others that I've talked to as well. Like, I have a little brother who's just starting high school, and he always uses YouTube as his way of connecting to education because he's grown up with it even more than I have. So in that way, I think it kind of has to lean more on being content sometimes in order to be engaging. So it's still educational, but it is rooted in being content as well. And as far as connecting with my peers, I think a big help is the fact that I came into this knowing that I was less experienced than typical crash course hosts. So I got the position as a junior in college. So clearly I didn't have as much educational background going on. But because of that, it allowed me to know I'm not an expert, but also take in that material and engage with it in a way that I could relate to. So we have episodes on like how to draft things and making sure you're not drafting the night before. And I know that I have drafted the night before, so I can kind of come into this and be like, look, I've been there. Don't be there, please. Make this easier for yourself. Yeah, so I think that knowing that I'm not an expert really brings it down a level and helps engage.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Like being closer to the educational experience I think can oftentimes make people better educators. Like at this point I'm far away from the first time I learned how to balance a chemical equation, and so I've kind of forgotten how I learned that, and now I just know it, and that does not help me teach it.
Right. Yeah.
I would also say that I'm still drafting the night before, so I will watch that video.
That's terrific. I think coming across as relatable is such an important point there. So Kristen, and we talked a little bit about community and who we're designing for. I think a lot of what we've talked about to date is designing directly for the learner, but Khan Academy resources and assets, and you said this at the beginning, is being used by certainly learners, but families, parents, teachers, administrators. How are you thinking about those different audiences in terms of developing content, but entire learning experiences?
I'm going to do that. I want to make one comment first on something that Hank said about we tell ourselves stories about ourselves. So I totally agree with everything about building knowledge about the world, but we also do that about ourselves. And one of the things that I think is really important is to build that story about yourself as a learner, and thinking about how we can help people understand and not be the I'm not good at math, I can't do, this science is too hard for me, and help them see their progress and see success, and see that they can do things, and communicate that this is for everyone, and having a little struggle is okay and actually helps you learn. We try to kind of bring in those messages as well, which then kind of links into, okay, how do we think about all of the potential different people that are potentially using Khan Academy? One of the things that we have traditionally been is very much for independent learners, people who want to pick something up, and we love independent learners, but also to get to scale. We talked about how important it is to scale, and particularly reaching maybe traditionally under-resourced groups and those students who aren't motivated to go out on their own and find an answer. We also are working to get into classrooms and work in a little more formal learning environments so that students have that exposure. We're a supplemental service, a supplemental resource that kids know that they can go to. They're, going to have that extra help when they're at home and it's late at night and they can't get there. But integrating into a classroom actually presents its own challenges in thinking about making sure that it's easy for teachers to be able to point to the things that align to what they're learning that day and that week, and make sure that students are easily able to align what's going on in their classrooms to what they're doing online and where those are. So it's we're taking that kind of next step of trying to reach out to maybe folks, like I said, who aren't naturally kind of looking for another resource or something new to learn, so that we can get them and then help them see that they too are learners and they too can succeed and build their knowledge in these things.
Great. You mentioned learning from home. That's a reality now for over 1 billion students. How has COVID shaped what you do and the response you're hearing from your communities on YouTube? Anybody who wants to jump in on that one?
Well, I'll jump in on that one. So in some ways, I always say that it's both the easy thing and the impossible thing about making a history channel is that everything in the world under the sun that you can think of has a history. And if you start to look back, there's, the old adage, there's nothing new under the sun. It could be both overwhelming, but also can be quite hope-giving. And so one of the things that we've been doing in terms of making content during COVID is trying to think about topics that relate to the pandemic, but also give people some insight into the fact that we've been here as a human, the human condition has been here before and has survived it, and we too can survive it. And that's a lofty goal and feels very weighty, and it puts a lot of pressure on the videos. But one of the favorite videos that we put out this year since COVID happened that I wrote was called Economic Lessons from Past Pandemics. And it was at the height of when, unemployment enrollment was at its peak. People were distressed. Oftentimes people, write in the comments section things about their personal lives. It's not just a strictly, people ask questions about the historical content, but they also ask things of the host. They want to feel as if, saying that when you see a host that you feel like you could relate to, you're more likely to learn from them. And I think that that's true because I try to relate to my audience. I try to feel close to them, as close as you can with 1 million, little usernames in the comment section. But I think making that episode on economic lessons from past pandemics was, people responded to it really well because they said, in some weird way, seeing that economies have failed because of pandemics before and then recovered gives me hope about our current moment, or teaches me something about what we're going through right now. And we did a couple of COVID-related episodes. We've done episodes related to race and protest and racial history in this country and legal history in this country in the wake of the protests that have been happening this year as well. So we try to make things that are connected to the current moment, but have sort of a historical precedent that people could look on and say, all right, what happened, or what can we learn from what played out? And then also, I guess a big difference in some of the COVID-related content we've been doing is that we are trying to sort of lean into the heavier topics, because people are searching for them more and they want the answers to those questions more. And it kind of like relates back to what I was saying about it's all about the question you ask. The questions that people have been asking us recently are things like, why do we have political parties? Because we're looking at a very polarizing election. Or, you know, what happens in an economic system, or what goes on during a pandemic? Like, these are the questions that people have been writing to us. So we want to engage them where they're at and also make things like the learning that we're doing feel active. Because one thing that Kristen said that I found really great was that, you know, learning something new, it could make you feel empowered. It makes you feel as if you're actively doing something. It makes you feel as if something's attainable or within reach. And we want our videos to always have that sentiment.
Thank you.
We definitely saw a 2.5 to 3 times spike in activity when everything closed down last spring. So that was fun to make sure, just, you know, that we were able to handle all of that. But what we saw as a big concern were people were worried about the material they didn't get last spring and if they would be ready for the courses they're taking this fall. So one of the things we did for math was create what we call Get Ready For courses. So if you go into the Get Ready For algebra course, it basically gives you the prerequisite skills that you need for your units in algebra. So if you're taking an algebra course this year, you can go into Get Ready For Algebra and say, I'm doing this unit next, and go through the content for your Get Ready For to make sure you've got those prerequisite skills for doing that unit in algebra, to kind of make sure we're dealing that everyone's kind of coming in with the skills they need to be successful this year. So that was one of the ways that we responded.
Yeah, I mean, our kids content in particular went up like 5x because people were like, well, I mean, my kids are going to be watching TV because of how we have to go to work or like manage our lives right now. And we don't want them to necessarily be watching the most vacuous things. So our kids content just exploded. And I think that probably is the case all over in all kinds of younger kid content. And then we definitely saw an initial spike and then a drop off as like people were like, well, I guess it's summer now. But I've also been really inspired to see what other people are doing. I think the Get Ready For courses are a really great idea, and like that is so necessary because it's just we've never run this experiment before, and we need to do everything we can to try and not lose learning during this process. I loved seeing what Mark Rober did at the end of the school year, where he did these like sort of live stream science lessons that were on, like that you could watch as they happened live, or you could watch them after the fact. And, just it makes me hopeful that people were like working together, try to figure out some solutions, and excited that, maybe that there are solutions that we just haven't tried yet because we hadn't had the need to experiment. And I don't know what that's going to end up being long term, but I think that there's a lot of one thing that is definitely the case is that a lot of money is flowing into this space right now, thinking like, well, I guess evolution is going to get turned up on its head. And money, I mean, like venture capital money. And I think, as is the case with these things often, like my guess is that a lot of that money will be misplaced, and the thing will be like, oh, it turns out that wasn't a good idea. But there are probably some gems in there, and hopefully that they will help education reach more people, lower barriers to higher ed or just to information, like help teach more effectively. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that all shakes out, because I know that there's a lot of people with really big ideas. And some of those people I think are really smart, and some of those people I think have big ideas that don't actually interface with the problems as they exist. But that's a loaded statement, but I don't need to go all the way into it.
Sure. So look, let's talk a little bit about where you all think we're headed. I'll note that the first YouTube video was uploaded only 15 years ago. think 15 years from now, for example, and Yumna, Danielle, you're certainly entrenched in this dichotomy of classroom experiences and then learning on platforms like YouTube. What does the future look like from your perspectives?
Yeah, I think the future looks like it's just going to be a lot more of this because, for example, 15 years ago, I was 6 and wasn't allowed on YouTube. So it's, and then like my little brother, when he was 6, he was fully entrenched in YouTube. So it's it's a growth kind of thing. I think the more that people lean on these resources and the more that they have already, I think we will see more of that come out and more opportunities for people to get involved with it and see it grow as well.
So I still remember very, very early YouTube. I was in high school when YouTube first came out, and it was mostly grainy cell phone footage from like the original flip phones that people had, and a lot of just personal blogging. I never envisioned that it would evolve into something this sophisticated. Because at that time, I completely dismissed it. I was like, this is a fad. It's a flash in the pan. Like, I don't know what this means. I've never been good at predicting the future, which is why I study the past. I will say that I think, similar to what Yumna's saying, that we'll see more hybrid learning with online resources and teachers. I don't envision a day when, maybe I also have a vested interest in it because I am a teacher, but I don't see a day when online learning will replace teachers altogether, because I think there's something really crucial about that interaction with an in-person educator and a student. And I think that any way that we can figure out to make the learning experience richer and also to help educators, because they're doing a lot of work, especially K through 12. I mean, I have so much respect for people who teach K through 12 because it's such a challenge. You're teaching, I have a friend who's a kindergarten teacher, and I always joke with her that I'm like, you're teaching them the word nice, how to spell it, and how to be it. Socializing them at the same time as you're also trying to teach them how to be a good human in the world. And anything that we could do to sort of bring online education into the classroom and sort of buoy the classroom experience for students and for teachers, I think that's what the future is going to be.
I will just jump on that because that's very close to what my answer that I had been thinking of was going to be. We got this spring kind of, education technology has been pretty slow to make its way into the classroom, really. And this spring, we then kind of got this crash push with no planning. Okay, now use it. And it was messy and, hard. What I'm hoping that we're going to see is a clearer understanding of, hey, what is the role of technology in the classroom? And then what does that let the teacher do if the teacher is spending less time on some of the things that technology can do too, and the teacher can spend time on building relationships and teaching kids how to be nice to each other and building all of that. And then what's the role of the student? And if we can have some clearer definitions of those roles and responsibilities in the classroom, I think that integration of technology in the classroom will be stronger.
Yeah. I think in terms of like, what does the world look like in 15 years? It's anybody's guess. What I will say is that, these things are actually slow. And so while it seems like we, because our world has changed so much in the last 15 years, when, Facebook barely existed, Twitter didn't exist, YouTube just started existing, it's impossible to even imagine that. The iPhone didn't exist. Like, there were no smartphones. Like, the world has changed a lot. And so it feels like, well, we must be almost all the way through. But I think, in fact, that we are at the very beginning of this shift. And, when we look back at big shifts in how communication changes, whether it's like printing press or radio or, like these big shifts, telephone, telegraph, they are the actual thing that have the biggest impact on society and on human history. Like, we talk a lot, I think that we focus way too much on weapons and not enough on communications when we're talking about like how the world structures itself. And And these things take time. They take time for people to get used to it. They take time to figure out even how to use it correctly. We go there, the history of like the effects of, printing press spreading across Europe is just like really like in many ways bad. Like it had a lot of negative effects on society, or like, I guess, disruptive effects. And maybe negative is the wrong word, but like there were wars. So like negative in that way. And so I think that we are at the beginning, and I think oftentimes about like what television looked like or what film looked like when we first had it versus what film looks like now. Like is no comparison there. And so, you start out basically filming plays, which is sort of analogous to like uploading a lecture to a YouTube channel. And then you're like, okay, well, actually this provides us with new tools. And so doing the thing that we were doing there, and just like you have to reimagine how to tell the story. And I think another, like a thing that we haven't interfaced with very deeply is that classrooms are a social experience, and the internet is not good at duplicating that. The internet is, we have found, good at duplicating some social experiences, bad at duplicating others, and very bad, like way worse than I expected. And so I like figuring out, and I don't think that many organizations have tried to interface with the like, how do you interface with the social experience of learning? Because I think that people forget that learning is a social experience. So I think that that is the sort of most under-imagined piece of this. And so I'm looking forward to, 15 years from now, seeing how we engaged with that.
Great. Thank you for that. So I do want to ask kind of a question here in closing. A great thing and a not so great thing about YouTube is that, anybody can be a contributor. Anybody can be an educator. This panel, we're talking from a great position of experience around developing content, growing community. What one or two pieces of advice might you offer to an organization or an individual who is interested in developing learning content on platforms such as YouTube? Hank, I'll start with you.
The hardest part is being right. And of course, it's very easy to be right 95% of the time, but it's very hard to be right 100% of the time. And it's really important when you are taking on the authority of an educator that you work to get that percent above 99%, and and ideally at 100. I don't think that it's not like we've never made a mistake in a video, but like that's hard, and it's work. And it's also really important to understand that when you get something wrong and people are mad at you, that's because you have taken on this authority, you've taken on that responsibility. And if you are, so you like the two important parts of this are like creating something engaging that will get people to watch it, because like you're not educating anybody if nobody's watching. But if you're sacrificing the accuracy to get to that thing, then like you are doing worse than educating no one. So figuring out how to do both of those things at the same time is a balance, and it's hard, and but it's also this like tremendously interesting creative problem to live within that constraint that I really enjoy. And so like if you can find joy in that constraint, if you can find joy and like inspiration in it, then that's where you want to be.
Others, one quick thing,
Sorry,
and then we're gonna have to wrap.
Thank you. I would say remember what it felt like when you were a student and you mastered something. Try to give that to your students, because I remember being a student and the just feeling of pride and happiness in understanding things. Oh, sorry, there's a fire engine that went by. You can't control the whole world, sadly. But I would like to say that, I remember being 14 or whatever, and going into the library in my high school, which was quite small and pretty, you know, pretty limited,